Today's video is going to be my final review on Elden Ring. It is an amazing game. It is not a perfect game, but it's pretty damn close. And I cannot believe the sheer amount of time I spent playing and thinking and grinding through this game, checking out all the dungeons, all the content I could find, all the quests I could get through. And then even when I was done, still sitting down for hours and hours on YouTube and watching other people talk about the lore and some of the other high conceptual ideas that totally went over my head, which is par for the course from the FromSoftware games, particularly because they're so dense in lore. There's a lot to unpack. The way they tell the story is very different than what you would expect in a normal traditional narrative game, and it was just an all-consuming event. Do I recommend this game? Absolutely. It is arguably one of the best games out there, but it is not perfect and it does have its flaws. So we're going to jump into a review today. It will be spoiler free, mostly. Be a little bit at the end. I mean, you know the game has to end, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about the end. Not really so much my specific ending, but I guess if you don't want to know anything at this point and you're absolutely living under a rock, I don't know where the hell you've been. You're definitely not coming to my channel for this kind of stuff, but I just wanted to lay that out there, okay? So you think you can watch with relative ease unless you just want to be completely blown away by absolutely everything Elden Ring, and you've done a phenomenal job of hiding from the rest of the world, okay? So we're going to break it down into two sections, hits and misses. I'm going to start off with the hits because there's a lot. And I think in my playthrough of the game and experimenting with the various builds and learning about the world, I got a much greater appreciation for what this game was trying to be. I played it in multiple play styles. I started off with a traditional sword and board, which is how I traditionally play these games. Max as many points as possible into stamina, get the strongest shield I can get, and basically stand behind it, tank shots, do one or two light jabs with a one-handed weapon, rinse, repeat. And it works very well. It's not the most fun play style for sure, but if you're having difficulty doing crazy dodge rolls and trying to be a two-handed samurai warrior or using some sort of magic attacks at far that leave you vulnerable for a very long time, well, totally understand. This play style may work for you, and it served me very well in all of the previous Souls games. Obviously, Bloodborne doesn't count because they don't really have a shield in that game, but this always works. And that's how I started everything off. And then as I played further, I transitioned into more elaborate play styles. So I feel like I have a good understanding of kind of what this game was going for. First and foremost, this is a massive open world. And it is massive. There are so many nooks and crannies and little teasers of lore and tidbits and NPCs that you'll find. There's so much to see and do, it can be overwhelming. But I feel like they've done a really good job with very complex level design. And you especially see this in what they call the legacy dungeons. Those are the kind of traditional Dark Souls type levels that have very elaborate, twirling, intricate level design where you'll do something and then you'll almost end up where you started. You'll kick a ladder or open a door or break a wall. It gives you a major shortcut to kind of beeline through some of the content you've done before. But either way, going through those more traditional legacy dungeons or just exploring in the world, you're going to find so many things to get into. And that is awesome because you are going to be rewarded for exploring. You're going to find some of the coolest items, some of the most interesting quests, and definitely some of the most entertaining weapon arts for sure as you go through this world. So going off in somewhere, finding a weird platforming thing that's like, ooh, am I supposed to be here? Yes, you are. They've designed the game very carefully to help you and to kind of steer you in the main direction, but going off on your own and getting into trouble is absolutely recommended in this game. The people who do the quote-unquote golden path will miss out on so much extra content that it's sad because people who are just like, no, I don't care. Like, you really need to owe it to yourself to lose yourself and invest yourself in this game. And unlike other games where I feel like losing yourself in the world and checking out every little corner may not always reward you with something, this game absolutely does. 100%. Almost every port of the map, almost every little mountain, every stream, every rock, every tree, something is around the next corner waiting for you to find it. And that is so, so cool. I talked about weapon arts, and weapon arts are real game changers in this too. That's something that I was really excited for as this game came out, because in the past, you typically would find a weapon you liked. You would put your statistics into that weapon, whether it be strength or dexterity or intelligence, whatever. And that would kind of be your go-to weapon, and you would kind of build your character, not necessarily around a weapon, but definitely around a play style. And weapon arts totally mix that up in this game. Now, there are legendary weapons that already have basically pre-programmed, if you want to think of it that way, weapon arts that do a very distinct thing. Call down a giant firestorm or make you take less damage or whatever it happens to be. But there's also a handful of just generic weapon arts that can be applied to pretty much any weapon that you find in the world, as long as it's not like a named legendary weapon. And those are the really fun ones to play with, because you will get some really interesting abilities that will radically change how you play. And because the weapon arts can be modified to emphasize one particular type of build or another, will result in you basically getting almost free respecs as time goes on. Allow me to explain. I had a really basic sword, like a katana, very basic katana. And I used it, and I was basically putting a lot of points into dexterity, which made me hit a little bit harder, and points into strength, which made me hit a little bit harder. I found a weapon art that changed my katana to have cold magic with it. And by doing cold magic, it changed the scaling from strength and a dexterity to dexterity and intelligence. Well, up until this point, I really had no reason to put points into intelligence, because I want to be a sword and board guy. I don't care about intelligence. I'm busy focusing on strength and endurance and dexterity in this particular build. Well, wouldn't you know, as I put more points into intelligence, my sword does a lot more damage because it's scaled that way. Now suddenly I can use cold magic. Oh, and by the way, because I've been putting points into intelligence, I now can suddenly start casting spells that I wasn't able to use before. So for me specifically, that really changed how I played the game, just with one weapon art, and there's a ton of them. You will find that you're able to put points into different things that you may not have thought important before, but may end up really enhancing your playstyle, and may also enhance your ability set, which is really, really cool. Now, I think also it's worth mentioning here that rarely did I ever feel like I did the wrong thing. There is obviously a min and max, and there's soft caps and hard caps and what they recommend you put points into and stuff. Towards the end of the game, when I was really just kind of done with it and getting ready to go fight the final boss and kind of move on to the next experience, I started respeccing my character. And I had saved up my respecs through the entire thing. So I had over, I think, 30 respecs. It was a very high amount. I easily respect probably 20 times in the course of an afternoon. I would respec, I would put points into something, I'd pick a specific weapon, I'd go try it, didn't like it, come back, rinse, repeat over and over. And while I did see minor improvements, like, well, maybe this did a little bit more damage here or a little less damage here, I had to sacrifice a little bit of strength or a little bit of health for a little bit of stamina, whatever. It really didn't matter too much. I only saw minor improvements. That really reinforced to me that the system had been built well. Yes, you can exploit the system. Yes, there are weapons and skills in the game that are still largely broken. But for the most part, the game has done a phenomenal job of balancing. So it's not like a field you're constantly like sweating bullets, like, what do I put my stat points into? They want you to experiment. The weapon arts enhance that. And I can't say enough about that. That was such a revolutionary, radical thought to me, that your character can essentially be respect on the fly while getting other cool things. I really appreciated that about this game. In terms of the game design, absolutely on point. graphics, the sound design, the official soundtrack, all phenomenal. I do struggle with the frame rate, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the misses section, but I will just say that overall, the aesthetic of the universe, the fact that each biome was so different, the fact that each legacy dungeon told a story, the fact that enemy design matched the lore, and that attacks were distinct and different enough from one another was really, really cool. And you do get a good sense of progression as you look at some of the enemies you start battling with at the end of the game versus going back to the starting area just to kind of putt around towards the end just to see what's out there and how different it feels between the two. And I love that. The way the music flares up into combat, the way the sound design really does, you can hear chains rattling and moaning and groaning and fire and water churning and all these sorts of things, really gives a sense of, a really good sense of environment. And that's something that I feel a lot of open world games have struggled with. I talked a lot about in my review, and I'm going to try not to compare this to other reviews that I've done, but one of the things that aggravated me so much about Assassin's Creed Valhalla was I thought the sound design was very poor and tinny. And I gotta say, Elden Ring, I felt like I was in a forest. I felt like I was on the top of the mountain. I felt like I was in water. I felt like I was near lava. It really builds an ambiance everywhere you go to, and it's really gets you in the mood for what you're exploring and fighting, and it's got a very cool semblance of, just that overall environmental design. So that was awesome. You're also given a single sense of purpose right from the beginning of the game. Your North Star is the Elden Tree. It's pretty much everything you see. Everybody talks about getting there. It's very clear where you need to go. Everything you fight, everything you see, everything you do will always eventually lead you to the Elden Tree. And while at the starting area, you can actually go south, and there's a small optional area to the south of the starting area. For the most part, the game is funneling you constantly towards the Elden Tree. And that's cool, because in a game where you don't have checkpoints, in a game where you don't, or waypoints rather, it's like, go here, it's like a giant marker, go to this spot, talk to this NPC, loot this item, like something in Skyrim. You don't have that. You have to kind of listen to the clues that people are giving you and deduce what's going on. There's a lot of treasure hunt type things, like with the artist paintings, where you're looking for something in the world based on how it looks. Think Ghost of Tsushima and how that world was told to you really without going over the top on maps, right? So this game has a lot of those elements too. And that's really good because it always makes you feel like you're progressing in a way that you're getting closer to the tree. Something is going to happen when you get there, and it does. But it's like, okay, I have a path. I can clearly see this is the direction I need to go in. The story. Story is complex, and as usual with all other FromSoftware games, told almost exclusively via item description. But it has this sweeping epicness through it all. There are so many layers of storytelling. You could really tell that George R.R. Martin was heavily invested in this. I get a lot of Game of Thrones vibes. And I mean that because as you start to kind of figure out what's going on, and I will admit it did not click with me right away. I did have to utilize the internet quite a bit to understand the true story behind the game. But I got bits and pieces of things. I was piecing some stuff together. But when you kind of start to figure out, like, okay, who am I supposed to be helping here? And there is a slew of people that you could essentially choose to align with. They all make sense in their own reason. And that's what I love. That's why I say it's like a Game of Thrones. You know, who deserves to be on the Iron Throne? Well, everybody has a stake, and everybody kind of makes sense on why they should be. Same with the Elden Ring. You know the Elden Tree is something's going to happen when you get there. But when you get there, what are you supposed to do? Well, this person's telling you this person's telling you this person's telling you this. It's kind of up to you to decide what is the quote-unquote right path. And I love that there is no right path because there's multiple endings. Some are really good, some are really bad, some are in between. But it's fun because it's vague enough that you are building your own story based on what your personal convictions are as a player. You are injecting your beliefs into the game. That's really cool. And the quests, even if it's just a side quest, the little things you do. Those are fun when you actually can figure out what you're supposed to do. They usually lead to really cool rewards, some phenomenal voice acting, some interesting storytelling. You will shape the world and the people around you, which is really, really neat. But that's where I transitioned from the hits into the misses. Because you really start to notice a lot of the systems that I just laid out and some of the flaws they have. We'll talk about the quests, how cool they were. Well, they're cool, but only when you know what the hell you're supposed to be doing. Because let's face it, a lot of the quests are very vague. An enemy says, or an NPC says to you, hey, thanks for helping me do something. I am going to the east, or I am going north. And then they'll give you a vague description of something. I'm going to the north where the water meets the rocks, or something like that. Doesn't really mean a whole lot to you. Unless you write it down and kind of study it, there's a really good chance you're going to miss crucial checkpoints with NPCs. I know I did quite a bit. And it's not because you're not paying attention, it's because the world is so vast and complex and you're not walking by the exact little cliff face that a random NPC is sitting at. You will totally miss that part of the quest. And that's frustrating. I don't like that the game doesn't give you a better indication of a journal system or something that kind of helps you track things. A recommendation that was given to me by Jason Schreier and some of the other reviewers was basically keep a notepad with you and write things down. And I did. I kept notes on my phone for this game to try to help me progress things. And after a while, I had so many quests that were uncompleted, clues that made no sense to me. I just ended up going online and following walkthroughs. That kind of defeats some of the magic. I didn't like that. In terms of some of the other negatives here, the dungeons, as fun as the side dungeons are, they are insanely repetitive. The Everjails that you'll find, the minor Elden Tree boss that you'll fight, I think, 13 times. The ruins that has the little dungeon with the single treasure chest at the bottom at the end. You're going to see this over and over and over again. And while it is fun to explore, and some of them do have somewhat of a distinct flair, or a mechanic, or something that needs to happen in order to progress, there is really just not a lot of excitement in the way that each dungeon aesthetically not only looks the same, functions the same, but ultimately ends up with a very similar type of reward. You'll find churches scattered throughout the land. A church always means a sacred tier. That's what's going to give you your flask do a little bit more oomph. It's going to give you a little more health or mana of your choosing. By the 6th or 7th church you find, there's no excitement of like, I wonder if there's an enemy sitting around the corner, or I wonder if this church has something neat going on. Nope, you're just going to run straight up to the front of it where all the other ones were, and you're going to loot your little item and move on with your life. Same thing with the jails, same thing with a lot of the side dungeons. And it becomes so repetitive that you kind of mindlessly start to do these things expecting your cookie at the end. But not only that, you know the flavor, the taste, and the type. And it's like, oh, that kind of stinks. And I don't like that. The fact that you do get a lot of loot, though, is awesome. But at times it can be overwhelming because it is hard to synergize when you have 90 different swords to select from and shields. And should I be one-handed or two-handed or dual-handed? Should I be a magician? What kind of magician? Should I use the faith-based spells or the intelligence-based spells? Or it's a lot to take in and synergize. And it's not really until you get kind of to the end of the game where you have a ton of points and you've kind of gone through the motion and you have successfully kind of completed everything, do you really have all the loot and all the talismans and all the items you need in order to build a really good build that does something really cool. For me, it was a two-handed bleed build, which I absolutely loved once I got the right items to do it, and that's how I beat the game. I retired the shield, I picked up 2 swords, and I went ham on every boss, and I had a lot of fun doing it. So keep that in mind, that your loot, while you do get a lot, it's not going to make sense until later. As I mentioned, there's a large reliance on the guides because the quests are very confusing. At times, you're not really sure where you're supposed to go. And I have to admit, even in terms of quests, the main quest itself, my ending seemed kind of lackluster, to be honest. I'm not going to give away the specifics. I had the ending called the Age of Stars. But I will say that after all the things I said and did, it ended on such ambiguity. I was really expecting more. I was expecting more dialogue. Maybe not even a jump cut of like, here's what life looks like in 1,000 years, but I invested so many hours into the game, and my ending was under 2 minutes. It did feel somewhat unsatisfying. It didn't feel like a finality. There are other endings in the game, particularly the Frenzied Flame ending, that to me is an awesome ending. I wish I had got that ending. I'll probably, when I do New Game Plus, I'll probably pick that ending just to kind of get some payoff and satisfaction. But I wish the ending had been a little bit more meaningful, because I don't think it was. There was a lot of difficulty spikes in the game, randomly, for no reason. There were times that I would fight bosses that died in seconds. I mean seconds. And I'm not talking when I got to end game and I had Rivers of Blood with me, or I'm talking about early on in the game. Rivers of Blood, by the way, is a really, really cool katana. I wasn't talking about that. I'm talking about like bosses that were just melt with anything. I would do a big two-handed attack and I would take off 3/4 of their health bar. My Mimic or my Hireling would basically finish them off while I was winding up for a second attack. Then there's some bosses that took me hours to beat, especially some of the endgame bosses. And it made really no sense as to why the game would get suddenly so easy and so hard. Was it because it was a hard counter to the build that I had? Was it because I hadn't spec'd properly into something else? I don't know. But I don't expect every boss to be insanely punishing, smash your head on the wall, and you spend a week beating everybody. But if it's going to be a natural progression of you're getting to the end, you're going to fight the big bad, then the big bad needs to be harder than the boss before him, and so on and so forth. But you would randomly fight these guys. You're like, nope, I can't do it. I'm leaving. And you wouldn't come back for hours. And then you destroy them, of course. But didn't seem like that was almost like a side effect of exploring the wrong area. But the game doesn't do that. Everything's fine until you get to that final boss. When you walk through that mist of light or the door, whatever, the fog mist door, you don't know what's on the other side. It could be a joke, or it could be an absolute just disaster, and that was frustrating to deal with as well. Speaking of frustration, of course, I have to mention the frame rate, which was absolutely inconsistent and really, really disorienting at times. It did smooth out quite a bit in interior corridors, and when the game truly hits a smooth 60 frame per second experience, it's jaw-dropping gorgeous. But when you're riding around on Torrent fighting a death bird, or you're in with a lot of NPCs and there's a lot of particle effects, whether it be fog or rain or smoke or ice, and the frame rate drops down, it really does snap you out of the experience, and that's hard to deal with. Online matchmaking was frustrating. The little bit I used it to try to get some summoned help on some of the end bosses, particularly any of the summons with human players, just did not work very well. I struggled quite a bit to get other people in my game that didn't look like they were teleporting everywhere or even connect with them at all. That wasn't really cool. One of the things I missed that I was sad about was the factions. If you remember in the previous Dark Souls games, you could essentially align yourself with a faction. And by doing specific things for that faction, defeating certain types of enemies, being a defender, being an attacker, whatever, you worked up that individual faction's essentially progression, and you would be rewarded with some really cool, unique items. And it was kind of like a badge of honor that you got a really cool item from a faction. As I did mention before, there are a lot of NPCs in this game that all have different things for you to do, but no factions exist in this game. And a lot of those, really assigning yourself to one type of person or one group of people just kind of made you, I don't know, it took something away from the game. You could still do pretty much everything you thought you could do in the previous Dark Souls games that would have been faction related. It's just here you're not actually getting any formal acknowledgement, rewards, titles, weapons, etc. And I think that was an oversight, considering the game is so large and there are very clear sects of people that are working together in a common goal, and you are intersecting with them and choosing to help or destroy them. It would have been nice to ally yourself with people to somehow receive some sort of reward or bonus for that, and that unfortunately doesn't exist in this game. My last negative was some of the combat was difficult to understand. There's clearly a hidden system behind the curtain here that deals with poise damage, your bleed damage, blood loss damage, poison damage, scarlet rot damage. that was very hard to understand when it was actually building up when you were actually on the offensive. On the defensive, sure, you get a little bar that kind of tells you, hey, look, you're about to get Scarlet Rot, or uh-oh, you're about to get whatever. When you're fighting an enemy, no idea. Is it one more swing until they explode, or 50? Well, good luck, figure it out. What boiled down to it for me was really at the end, I dropped the sword and board, and I picked up a sword. And I went Rambo on people. And that way, it didn't matter what status effects they were getting. They were getting them all because I was spamming weapon arts and being incredibly aggressive in boss battles. And it worked very well for me, but that's maybe not the way the game was designed to be. But it worked well for me. So keep that in mind as well. As I wrap up this review, like I said, I wanted to lay out the pluses and the minuses. There are a lot, but despite all of the negatives, and there are quite a bit, I can't stop thinking about this game. I've already, I'm committed to a new game plus. I want to continue in the adventure. I want to continue in the story. I want to see what happens next. I want to get more weapons. I want to get more gear. I want to get stronger. I want to start doing PvP. I want to have fun with this universe because it's so rich and dense and exciting. The combat is fluid and dynamic. The weapons are unique. The weapon arts are unique. Yes, you can cookie cutter a build, but finding what works for you is so much fun. And when you actually click and you start jamming through this game, you're going to lose yourself for hours and hours and hours, as so many of other people like myself have done. Yes, you look at the numbers now, and the numbers in the game are dropping off. Well, for many others, I know for me, this is the only game I've honestly played outside of doing some little Halo stuff. This is the only game I've seriously played in about 2 months. So I'm ready for more adventures with Elden Ring, but it's also a relief that I can move on to other things. But this game will absolutely suck you in and reward you for that hard work. Maybe not so much on the ending. Maybe I'm wrong. You beat it, let me know. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. But that wraps up my thoughts on Elden Ring. I hope you guys found this video interesting, fun, informative, maybe a little bit of each. Leave some comments below. Try to keep it spoiler-free for all the other friends who have yet to actually get to the end. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything Elden Ring. So, thank you all so much for watching. Take care of yourselves. And until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.